Welcome back to the Rollup High Roller community. As always, nothing on the Rollup is to be construed as financial advice. We are just some educators in the DeFi space. Toss us a quick like, give us a share, a repost, send it to a friend who may want to watch this, and finally, give us a sub or a follow. It means the world to help support credibly neutral educational content in DeFi. We're here to educate, empower, and enrich you, and let's jump in.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rollup. Today we have a very special modular episode. We're going to be talking with the CEO of Hadron Labs. Is it 𝗵𝗵𝗴𝗵? How do you?
Yeah, it's designed to be confusing. I pronounce it 𝗵𝗵𝗴𝗵, but any pronunciation will do.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're here with 𝗵𝗵𝗴𝗵 today, and we're gonna be digging through the modular ecosystem here. 𝗵𝗵𝗴𝗵, you were on a while back, a few months ago, and that was like the precipice of modularity. It was like just starting to come out, and we were talking quite a bit about 𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵 and how interoperability happens in a modular ecosystem. So maybe we can kind of do like a quick synopsis on that point, and then we can start to branch into all the new things that are happening in the modular ecosystem. So first and foremost, kind of like let's recap, like, what does modularity mean to you? And then how does interop work in the modular ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of the fundamental idea of modularity is the idea that there is no single machine that fits every use case perfectly. Basically, anytime you're building a system, you're making design trade-offs, and therefore, if you have the ability to essentially segment what you need to do into multiple segments and then pick the right solutions for each of these segments, then you can provide more scalability, better features, better security, better decentralization, whatever it is that you're trying to optimize for. By picking the right solutions for it, you're able to build it better, faster, cheaper than if you were trying to make one thing that did everything perfectly, which usually you probably won't be able to do anyway. And so like this has like implications in terms of like the blockchain infrastructure itself. And we've seen, like, as you mentioned, kind of like the rise of Celestia and its ecosystem, as well as like alternatives in the DA sector. I think this has been like top of mind for everyone in the market for quite a few months now. But I think there's also sort of like another kind of like more horizontal layer of like, how do you then connect these pieces, these ecosystems, and these applications that exist in the modular realm, right? Because they take these features from various service providers and ecosystems, but then how do you ensure that at the end of the day, from the user's perspective, right, there's a cohesive kind of like experience whereby, sure, I might be jumping from one stack to the other or in between rollups that are on the same DA layer. Like, for example, on Celestia, assuming everything continues to go well, we're looking at a world in which there's going to be like dozens, maybe hundreds of rollups that exist on this layer. How do you make it seamless for a user to just like go from one application to the other? Because at the end of the day, that's kind of what really matters, right? The technology is super important, but the use case is at the end of the day what justifies the technology. And so I think like we're seeing a lot of like very exciting developments. There's a lot of like fundamental work being done on like security models and like proving technologies. Can we do like ZK proof aggregations in order to make basically like bridging super fast and cheap between all of these rollups? But in kind of like the initial stages of this happening, some of the like not all of these solutions already exist, and you still need to connect these things, right? Like, how are users going to bridge into these domains? How are they going to start interacting with these applications? And so, like, this is, I think, the thought that kind of led us to be, I think, on the forefront of providing the solution there. We worked very closely with Hyperlane and Celestia to launch Nexus, which is sort of like the first bridge to the modular realm. It's a implementation of Hyperlane between Neutron and the rollups on Celestia that allow you to essentially one-click bridge, for example, like TIA, but also other assets, directly into any of the rollups that are on Celestia, including like Arbitrum as well, like Manta and Arbitrum and a few others. And yeah, that has been like a super kind of like an exciting experience because we've seen sort of like this rush of users, especially like in the first few days when the rollups were launching, like just basically bridging funds and like trying out these new technologies, these new ecosystems that were being born. So yeah,
very cool. We've spoken a lot about Celestia on this channel. Actually, our last podcast, which is not released yet, but is going to be released in the next week or two, is with Nick White. So we were grilling him on all of the Celestia architectures, the mental models, data availability sampling, and generally how Celestia is organized and how rollups are leveraging that technology and building on top of it. So it's very, very cool to see Neutron and 𝗵cie Hyperlane kind of work together to provide the infrastructure and access for these Celestia rollups that still provides a cohesive and a seamless experience to move across these rollups. So let's hone in on the interoperability, like to paint the picture for those who are watching. Like Celestia and modularity like gives way to all of these new rollups that are just kind of like freckled across the entire ecosystem. Now, traditionally, because these are modular, they're somewhat disconnected, but that's where Neutron and Hyperlane, they come in and are now building the paths between these rollups. So could you unpack like what the interoperability solution is to navigate between these Celestia rollups? What does Hyperlane do? And then what does Neutron do? And maybe by kind of like enumerating what it is that each of you do individually, we could come to a more clear understanding of how interoperability works between these rollups.
Yeah, absolutely. Not sure what happened with my camera here. Give me a sec.
It's okay. We got a close up. We can also edit this out, so no worries. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does actually. It makes a whole ton of sense. I'm just not sure what's going on with the camera though. Do you mind if I just like reload the thing, or is it going to break anything?
I think it's fine to reload.
Okay, thank you. I think currently there's like a few different functions, right? There's connecting the rollups to the base layer via Neutron. There's connecting the rollups to general flows and graphs of liquidity and assets, and then there's like connecting rollups together, right? I think the first sort of like step is to understand that contrary to other platforms, Celestia intentionally chose not to have an execution environment. And this is done for a very, very good reason, which is that it allows it to become a better, more optimized data availability layer, essentially, right? There's no other operations that kind of like crowd block space and the machines power it, let's say. And as a result, it provides a better service, right? It does have a few consequences in that you can't just go and deploy a bridge contract like you would on another platform between the rollup and the Celestia base layer, essentially. And so instead, what you currently have to do is you have to bridge from Celestia to another chain, and then from that chain into the rollup. And so what Neutron does, what Neutron and Hyperlane do actually, is Neutron serves as this second base in which you can do an IBC transfer, which is a very, very secure bridging mechanism that essentially has both blockchains verify each other's blocks in order to ensure that the messages are correct. Once you've sort of like done that bridge transaction, we've designed Nexus so that when you're triggering this transfer, it includes information that gets passed onto the Hyperlane contract that then basically trigger the transfer or the action onto like to bring the tokens to the rollup, right? And as a result of this, you're essentially offering like a one-click flow for anyone to go between, like from the Celestia base layer to the rollup and vice versa, right? And by doing so, and also because Neutron is well connected to the rest of the liquidity graph, you essentially turn, like you provide a one-click sort of like key in hand solution to rollups looking to bootstrap their ecosystem to really plug themselves into the entire liquidity graph of the ecosystem, right? Because like you can connect through Axelar to Ethereum and other like ecosystems. You can connect through Wormhole to like Ethereum, other ecosystems, BNB, and what have you. There's the whole of IBC, one hop away. extra, and that allows essentially whatever form of capital and whatever user is interested in joining the ecosystem to do so with like very, very low friction, essentially. Now, the beauty of Hyperlane as a framework is that it's fully permissionless, right? So any rollup can customize its security module, deploy an instance of Hyperlane, and then connect point to point to any of the other deployments of Hyperlane, right? And so the idea is that, like, we're not trying to build like a moat in which we're locking developers or their ecosystems in, right? We're simply like helping them bootstrap the tools that they can use to connect to the rest of the ecosystem and its liquidity and users, essentially, right? And then each ecosystem can decide on its own terms what security properties it requires for connecting with others, as well as sort of like the ecosystems that it wants to connect to and the ecosystems that it doesn't really care enough to really like take these steps for.
Man, we are so early. Like the all of this is infrastructure, right? Like this is all about like providing developers and builders the tools for them to connect their chains with other chains. So we are still on the precipice of like the user experience and the scale that will kind of like bring on mass adoption, which makes me very bullish and very optimistic for the future, because we're still solving these puzzles at the base layer, and there are so many opportunities to onboard users on layers on top of that. But this is the primitive work that needs to get done in order to build those applications on top. So I've got a couple of questions kind of like at the base layer. For the interop solution to happen, let's say there's multiple rollups that use Celestia for DA. Does the bridge send tokens from rollup to rollup, or does it send from rollup to base layer and then base layer to rollup?
Well, so it depends, essentially. If by base layer you mean Celestia, it probably doesn't serve as kind of like the other intermediary hop, because it doesn't have an execution layer, and so the hop would rather be the Hyperlane contracts on Neutron in that case. That being said, as I said, you can deploy Hyperlane mailboxes on your own terms, and so if you want to create a connection between, say, like 𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗵 and 𝗵𝗶𝗏, you can do so directly, actually. And you don't need to go to the Hyperlane team or the Neutron team and ask them for permission. You can just take the contracts and deploy them. There's like versions of them that support like the VM as well as 𝗂𝗏 and most of the like leading virtual machines. And so you can just go and create the bridge that you want to have, essentially, right? And this, like, why is that? I think the idea is there's a bit of a tendency to sort of like create moats around these connections that sort of like ecosystems depend on, which is all good and is bankable, I guess. But it does restrict the ability of like projects to really retain sovereignty over the decisions that they're making for their environment, as well as for the assets that their protocol issues. There was this case, for example, with Lido recently has been enabling rev-staked ETH and staked ETH to be brought into other ecosystems to be deployed in their DeFi applications. But every time that happens, there's a sort of a question whereby if relying only on one bridge provider, it makes things a lot more straightforward, but competition can also lead to sort of like suboptimal effects, in the sense that if you end up with multiple bridges enabling the bridging for the asset, you end up with multiple denominations that are not fungible, and you end up with no control from the DAOs from the DAO onto like exactly how they're bridged, right? And so if your DAO is minting this asset and then eventually decides that, look, the risk of X model of bridging is not something that we're comfortable with anymore. We want to enable X feature to make it more secure, or X feature to make it more appealing to users. You can't really do this unless third-party DAOs and teams kind of like do the work with you to sort of like change their own systems, which is a lot less convenient. But with sort of like permissionless interoperability, you actually retain sovereignty over the mechanisms, the bridges, the rails that are used to move assets across. And so you retain that optionality long term to shape the bridging strategy that you have as the ecosystems and as the technologies evolve, right? For example, like today, 𝗵𝗶𝗴 is probably one of the most robust implementations of bridging out there. It's doing, orders of magnitudes more volume than most other bridge implementations, and it's doing so with, a fairly clean track record, which is, surprising for bridge technology, which has historically been like the target of a number of attacks. And so you can develop an 𝗵𝗶𝗴-based module, e.g., you can have the same verification logic as 𝗵𝗶𝗴 does, implemented in an ICM for hyperlane, right? So if you wanted, you could create a bridge that starts with just a simple multisig that signs on transactions, and then upgrade into something like 𝗵𝗶𝗴, and then potentially one day when the technologies for ZK proving are mature enough, you can replace your ISM with something that uses ZK proofs to essentially like verify that the messages are correct, right? And so essentially it allows you to control who you're connecting with and on what terms you're connecting with them, and on what security guarantees you're willing to basically connect, essentially, right?
Very cool. Yeah, I think this is like as a result of like all of the infrastructure and all of the development that's happened in the modular ecosystem. And like we just continue to see this proliferation and specialization of tooling. 𝗵𝗶𝗴 is like a great example of that in the bridging ecosystem. And now we're starting to see some other interoperability solutions come up. So, you and Hyperlane have been able to create this seamless bridging and permissionless bridging experience. Have you? And you also mentioned how Arbitrum, and there's a couple of other networks that aren't inherently like Cosmos related or Celestia related that are also available to bridge on Hyperlane and Nexus. Is there any kind of like 𝗵𝗶𝗴 to EVM compatibility that you guys use? Is there like a union that enables these like sovereign interop solutions? Have you considered kind of adding EVM support? And if not, why not? And if so, like how and why did you choose to do that?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, like you can deploy an Hyperlane mailbox to an EVM network today, right? So I think it's called Orbit, the Arbitrum rollup that uses Celestia for DA. I could be wrong though, so please check. Please feel free to fact check me here. But essentially, yeah, you can deploy an Hyperlane route to an EVM network. You can deploy an IVM, like an Hyperlane route between like Neutron and Ethereum mainnet today, actually. In fact, that's what's being used to develop a potential bridge aggregation system between Ethereum and Neutron to allow for the secure bridging of like high value assets, as well as like governance instructions, so that you could have a protocol on Ethereum that controls an outpost on Neutron, or vice versa. So like all of this is basically like possible today, and it's being worked on today. Now for 𝗵𝗶𝗴 specifically, the main hurdles here are basically the fact that, contrary to Cosmos chains, where the light clients are run in protocol and therefore don't cost gas, in Ethereum, they're not in the base layer itself. And so if you want to implement a light client of another network, you then have to verify all of this information in a smart contract itself, which not only would cost absurd amounts of gas, but actually runs into the gas limits per blocks on the Ethereum network, right? So instead of doing this all on chain, kind of like in the straightforward but brutish manner, what most protocols are working on to enable like bridging to and from Ethereum with the properties of 𝗵𝗶𝗴 is to essentially ZK the system, so that you would do the proof verification. Well, you would do the proof computation of chain based on this data, and then you would simply submit the proof on the Ethereum mainnet, and then it would be verified there. And as long as it's verified, you know that indeed the the connection is secure, the messages are valid, it corresponds to the state of the other blockchain, all of the properties that you want to have in order to sort of like guarantee the security of the bridge, essentially. And there's a number of projects that are doing this in very interesting ways. I think like you've mentioned Union, I think Composable, Polymer, and a few others are all like very interesting teams and projects trying to find the best approach to solving exactly this problem.
Got it. Okay. And you did, that was a great explanation of kind of like laying the problem statement out. How would Hyperlane and Neutron and Nexus integrate these technologies into the existing permissionless solution that you guys have with Nexus?
That's a really good question. So, I mean, Neutron itself as a settlement layer, as a DeFi ecosystem, is it's sort of bridge agnostic, right? It's a permissionless network, and as a result of this, you can essentially use any bridge that you want with it. You can deploy any bridge that you want on it. So there's kind of like this to take into account. That being said, there are projects to essentially aggregate these technologies in order to create bridges that are resistant to the failure of any given bridge provider, so that if any one provider gets hacked or their network somehow is destroyed, attacked by North Korea or what have you, the entire bridge itself is actually not compromised. So that's one approach that I find interesting. It does have impact on like gas costs and such if you're forced to call a number of different bridge contracts, especially in the Ethereum mainnet. But this can be like worked around by essentially batching transactions so that users essentially go through an underwriter market that take on the risk of a reorg of Ethereum itself. And that service essentially is provided for a very low fee because the bridge that underlies the transfer is actually extremely secure. And so you have essentially like a liquidity provider, whether they're active or passive, e.g. whether it's a liquidity pool or an entity that is similar to a market maker, is kind of like irrelevant. But essentially, they provide the liquidity on the other end, and they just wait for enough of the transactions to be accumulated on one side to essentially settle through the very secure bridge, right? So that's one approach that's interesting in like making these connections between ecosystems more robust. The other thing is there's a good amount of work that's going into sort of like enabling the more advanced features and applications that exist on protocols like 𝗵𝗶 to exist on these other bridges, right? And I think there's likely going to be some degree of standardization eventually, as more and more protocols are going to want to have access to these things, right? Because imagine you're an application on Cosmos today, you're able to start creating accounts on other blockchains to hold assets and use their DeFi applications. You're able to retrieve data, like from Neutron, you're able to retrieve data from other chains so that you can minimize the reliance on off-chain oracles, and you can essentially have your own way to read data from other blockchains. Those features are like extremely useful in order to build more robust cross-chain DeFi protocols so that you can provide access anywhere, and you can essentially provide a seamless onboarding flow from users. Essentially, at the end of the day, the experience that we want to get towards is wherever you are with your assets currently, if you want to use this protocol, or more so, not even use this protocol, but more so access this one product or opportunity that you found and that you'd like to benefit from, you can do so in one click wherever you are, because the stack is so well connected together that all of the minute operations that might be happening to actually bring your assets where they need to be for this to happen are completely irrelevant to your experience as a user. And so like there's a bunch of competing standards that are emerging, which I find exciting, because it means that the market will have a number of options to basically choose from in order to get sort of like to the best sort of like trade-offs, right? But I do expect that a number of these standards will continue to exist and persist in the market. So that's kind of like my outlook there.
Yeah, hence the advantage of modular architecture, and by further standardization, we're able to achieve this like interchangeable part sort of framework. which allows these projects to specialize deeper and deeper into the stack, provide like more specialized tooling, and then hence like just frankly like better tooling in that regard. And then it kind of opens up the question of like connecting them with one another underneath the hood to provide users a seamless experience. That's kind of what it seems like we're doing. Like there's this process of unbundling where like the specialized builders are focusing on each particular vertical of the stack. And then there's projects that are focused on bundling those back together so that users have a more seamless experience. And I think like because we go through these like this pattern of unbundling and bundling back together, we're able to just kind of like put everything on the table, see where things are broken or inefficient, improve that in that particular piece. And then when we bundle the thing back together, the entire stack is more efficient overall because the weakest link is now improved. So I think this is a very cool like pattern that we tend to see in these development cycles of blockchain technology. And it is very, very cool to see like this entire unbundling process with modularity. And now the interoperability solutions start to bundle those back up together for the benefit of the end user and the comprehensive, cohesive, seamless experience that users have come to enjoy. And yeah, I think this is like a very, very cool pattern that has become the norm in these development cycles.
I think you could call it the double diamond process, right? Like first you expand everything and then you sort of like refine, and you do this over and over again to get better iterations every time.
Yeah, double diamond. I like that. Sounds rare. Sounds valuable. Cool, man.
Indeed.
Well, speaking of value, the Neutron staking module, like NTRN, is there anything that like, you know, we like to have like an actionable set of kind of procedures that like our community is able to like follow so that they can get involved. And it seems like there's lots happening underneath the hood with Neutron. Is there anything that our community can do, like staking Neutron, or anything that they can do to get involved so that they can, you know, be a participant in the ecosystem, maybe a recipient of future airdrops if they're staking? Like what is it so that like our community can get involved and kind of make sure that they're part of this modular interoperability path?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the considerations, like first, Neutron is the first chain on replicated security, which is it's the Cosmos Hub's restaking implementation, essentially. And as a result of this, it's like NTRN itself is actually not a staking asset. What secures the Neutron blockchain is Atom staked on Cosmos Hub. So like, sure, you can definitely go ahead and get some exposure to Atom if you would like to, and then stake that. The alternatives is, I think, you know, like the probably the best first step as a user is just like try bridging to Neutron and try out the ecosystem, right? There's ways for you to essentially bridge from wherever you are. That might be like satellite, that might be through the 𝗵 API and the various bridges that dApps themselves provide. There's a number of connections to Ethereum, for example. Regardless of where you're from, it's likely that the token you're using to bridge will be accepted as gas. So for example, if you have like TIA or 𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗃 or USDC, all of these things you can use to pay for gas. And then you can discover the entire like DeFi ecosystem, right? I think like good candidates for first experiences would be like Astroport, which is a well-rounded like decentralized exchange. Mars is also a great credit protocol, which is providing advanced features like credit accounts. So the idea is that, you know, you can essentially move any type of collateral into the protocol and use this as your margin to either margin trade or eventually potentially, you know, trade perps, for example. And there's like Apollo, which is launching today on Astroport, actually, which is providing sort of like automated strategies for LSD tokens, including 𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗃 and others. So there's, you know, a bunch of things to discover. One thing that I think might be interesting to folks is that if you're like the Neutron DAO is basically designed in a way whereby it tries to minimize the opportunity cost of participating in governance, so that you could essentially provide liquidity to a DEX, and then the intern that you would use for that, if you decide to do so, could be could basically be counted by a vault of the governance instance, so that sure, you're LPing, but you're still, you own these, and therefore you own the voting power, and therefore you can participate in governance, right? So check out governance.neutron.org if you're interested in getting into the governance there. To be fully fair and transparent, I would say that there's one issue on the user experience front currently, which is that there's a number of solutions that are available for each of these actions, but they're not super well put together so that you can pick which one you want to use from the get-go. And this is something that we're working on essentially. And so in a couple of weeks or month, you'll be able to essentially take all of these basic actions on the network from a single nicely designed interface where you can see your entire portfolio and what you're doing on the network. You're able to participate in governance and vote. You're able to swap or bridge in and out of the chain and that kind of stuff, right? All from one home base. So I'm excited about that, to be fair.
Yeah. Once again, just representative of how early we are in this trajectory. We're still going and connecting these rollups together. And part of that is also bringing together the applications under one roof so that someone is aware of and able to compare across all of these existing solutions. Yeah, so I'm very bullish, very optimistic to see what happens next in this interoperability story. And I think there's been some amazing work by celestia, by all of these modular pieces and projects. And yeah, shout out to Neutron for pulling all of those solutions together and making sure that interop is real.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my bet is on integrated applications. I think the idea is right. There's a number of stacks that are best at specific things, right? And you should be building on the stack that best suit what you're trying to build's requirements, essentially, right? And so, from this analysis, we kind of coined this concept of an integrated application. An integrated application is an app that doesn't simply have access to synchronous composability with other smart contracts on a platform, but is also able to deeply integrate with the base layer and the feature that it provides in order to provide better experiences to user, higher performance, more security, better products, essentially, but also able to interoperate natively with other applications on other stacks so that you essentially get, once again, better flows, but also more capital efficiency and the ability to scale that protocol without having to redeploy it. It's every time that you're trying to expand the protocol to a new domain. And I think the reason my bet is on this thesis particularly is because it provides the best of both worlds, right? You have the deep integration that provides you with more advanced features, like the ability to customize how block production happens, the ability to retrieve data from the chain itself, in which an oracle can be run, the the network and scale economies of having a shared environment, with the ability to directly interoperate with any of the other applications in this myriad of rollups and roll apps being created these days, natively out of the box, right? So essentially, what you get at the end of the day is you have a very advanced stack that provides you very advanced features in order to build applications you couldn't build on more generalized standard layers like Ethereum, as well as the ability not to really choose which market to be in, but rather choose to be in all of them, because you're able to really directly tap into their user base and liquidity from anywhere they are, essentially, right?
Yeah, this is going to upgrade applications themselves. So there is
Well, that's the point, right? I think
yeah.
throughout this discussion, you've sort of highlighted how early we are as builders focusing on infrastructure, and I fully agree with you. I think you're right, and I think, to be fair, this has been one of the blind spots of the industry, which is we can get the best infrastructure ever. If nobody starts building applications, then it's still not the full vision being realized, right? And so what we're trying to do is really empower the teams that are actually building these applications today, right? We try to look at exactly what their problems are, their limitations, and what we see is that like some of the best teams out there are basically limited by the layer that they're in their mechanism design and such. They're trying to bring innovative products into the market, and they're failing to do so because of gas constraints or inability to control a certain portion of like the stack itself. And so we're trying to unlocking these things, right? This like what I think is like an interesting representation of this is kind of like the story of the folks at Duality Labs. So they're a very talented team of engineers and like mechanism designers, and they started their journey in Ethereum. They helped design like incentives and market structures for a number of DEXs in the Ethereum ecosystem. And when it came to building their own product, they wanted to make an exchange design that would basically have the best features of both AMMs and order books, and would work well on kind of like shared decentralized stacks, whilst also in like using this to basically create fair market structures, right? And when they started implementing it, they started running into the limitations of the EVM on Ethereum mainnet, and so that led them to sort of like reconsider and eventually move to Cosmos, where they started building an app chain called the Duality chain, essentially. And like fast forward a couple of months, we like contributors to Neutron and contributors to Duality met, and we just realized that we had like a very similar vision as to what we were trying to achieve, bringing these products, bringing this infrastructure, building kind of like a new generation of DeFi products, and sort of like realized that actually it made a lot of sense to collaborate. And that sort of like all culminated in Duality being sort of like merged into the Neutron binary to make it available to the entire ecosystem that's building on Neutron, so that they can benefit from the advanced features of this sort of like in protocol DEX infrastructure. And yeah, like that has been kind of like wild, but it has culminated last year, very like basically just before the holidays, into an upgrade that successfully brought all of the code of this other blockchain into the Neutron blockchain, so that anyone deploying a smart contract on Neutron can now leverage it to build more efficient AMMs and such.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I mean these optimizations, I think we're going to continue to see them, and like this is part of kind of like this like bundling up and this combination of technologies that we're going to start to see to create these more efficient stacks. Like, so this was a combination that kind of occurred at the chain level, and I imagine that like what we are going to see is more of these combinations happen, and probably at I'm not sure at what level they'll happen, but they'll happen because that we have these modules that are able to connect with one another. So if we have, a module that allows developers to build more efficient AMMs, that is a tooling and a piece of code that's able to connect with multiple other modules that give these developers settlement. They give it these modules give developers AMMs. They give them business logic. They give them sequencing and data availability, and all of them come together because now we're able to mix and match and plug in these modules with one another to optimize for certain use cases. Not to say that one flavor combination of modules is going to fit all of the applications, but now developers have multiple choices at their fingertips, and they're able to optimize this stack for their particular use case.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this was exactly the design philosophy that led to the rise and adoption of like the Cosmos SDK, which exactly had this like modular approach to building components that could then be reused, right? And this has led to like great achievements. Like I think recently last year we had like 𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬 move from Starknet to a Cosmos SDK blockchain for exactly this reason, right? It allowed them to essentially build a blockchain very fast, but also design the components that they wanted to innovate on to provide a better product, right? And I think we're going to see this more generally and actually I think we're starting to see this as well in the like Rollup world as well, with like I think leading candidates being like the Sovereign SDK, for example, is essentially, in my opinion, going to be the Rolls Royce of like Rollup SDKs by enabling you to build like ZK rollups with unparalleled ease. So yeah, like I think this is definitely something to watch out for, because it will make the ecosystem like grow at a much faster rate, essentially.
Yeah, that's the sovereign SDK, right?
Yep, correct.
Very cool. Do you think there's anything missing, like currently, that maybe you guys have on the roadmap? And you did mention kind of like putting all of these components into one easy to understand user interface. Is there any like other activations that are happening on Neutron that you're particularly excited about in the near future?
Yeah, I think so. The Mars Protocol DAO is working on a very massive upgrade to their protocol, which sort of coincides, or will likely coincide, with the release of a very exciting liquid staking protocol on Neutron, which subject to governance approval might be like Lido on Cosmos, essentially. And those two things like synergize particularly well with each other, because they allow staking. They essentially allow you to participate in one of the products that has the most clear product market fit in the industry, which is like really good margin or perps trading with assets that are yield bearing as collateral, and with like very nice kind of like connective properties between the liquidity and your ability to take on that leverage efficiently and synchronously. So this, I think, is going to be a product that folks are like, that I personally find like extremely exciting, and that's going to be like coming out soon and around the same time. And so I think it's likely that there might be initiatives to sort of like bolster the initial adoption phase of all of these products, such as like more widespread like liquidity mining and such, and potentially like airdrops or what have you. So I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but that's probably what I'm most excited in terms of like the short term kind of like outlook of the growth of the DeFi ecosystem.
Very cool. Very cool. And as we sort of wrap up here, I guess I've just got like some miscellaneous questions that would be great for our community to understand. Neutron is part of the Cosmos ecosystem, and therefore has proof of stake validators with atoms staked in Neutron validators. Is there a component of light clients at all to kind of tap into like a full node of Neutron, or I guess like does Neutron have light clients to do any kind of like data availability sampling, or is that outsourced to a data availability protocol like Celestia?
So Neutron as a settlement layer technically has what it takes to do simple GA. You could publish data to Neutron's blocks, and it's likely that some rollups will actually do just that. That being said, for data availability sampling specifically, what you're looking for is like Celestia light nodes being run on the chain and then posting these attestations on the network, right? We've actually our CTO has actually designed and spec'd out, let's say, a module that would do exactly just that. It essentially like allows validators, like Neutron validators, to run light nodes of the Celestia blockchain, and then use this to attest to the availability of specific chunks of data in order for them to be used in the verification, for example, of like Rollup that use Neutron as a settlement platform where their validating bridge is to be done, with full information and better like security properties, essentially. So yeah, it's completely technically possible. Now, more generally, like the way IBC works is by having like clients of each chain that one chain is connected to, basically run in protocol as well. So yeah, there's also that, which is that Neutron currently contains a number of like clients of other Cosmos blockchains, including Celestia, which allows it to have IBC as a bridging framework between these chains, essentially.
Very cool. Awesome. I think that's a huge unlock. Like it's the direction that we see like not only Ethereum going with with its data availability and how like it's kind of taking this modular like rollup centric route. And then now Atom and Cosmos, which has taken the modular route since the beginning, is starting to like outpace Ethereum in some of these specific areas of development. So it's very,
I
very cool
actually
to
think
see.
what we're going to see is like a coming together, or like if I wanted to meme this, I would be like, the real merge is the merge between Ethereum and Cosmos, actually, because
Nice.
like what I think is super fascinating about the history of the space is that like both of these ecosystems were thinking about the same problem and came to different solutions that end up being complementary, whereby the rollup-centric roadmap of Ethereum is now creating all of these new domains and offloading kind of like the compute and the resource requirements to all of the rollups that it secures, so that the base layer itself can focus on like the highest value transactions, as well as just like making these secure and storing their data. But what it does create is like a need for methods of communications between these various domains, right? And like this is not something that has been solved currently, right? Like bridging systems between the various rollups are not standardized. A lot of them rely on like trusted multi-sigs. Some of them are moving towards governance, which is likely a much better trust assumption. But there's essentially like a whole lot to be done in this regard. But it turns out that, Cosmos has been working on this for like years now, essentially, right? And IBC is the result of this work. It's a protocol that has like much superior trust assumptions and has and is abstract enough that there's a number of applications that you can build on top of IBC, right? So like we mentioned a couple in this call already, whereby you can build applications on top of IBC that allows smart contracts to retrieve data from other chains trustlessly without the need of like having a third-party off-chain provider and like running computers and posting this on chain and you trusting them. You can just verify the other blockchain. It allows you to have token transfers, of course, but you can also have like routing multi-hops. You can have the ability for smart contracts to control interchain accounts and use these accounts to essentially pass messages like transactions of another rollup so that they can get executed there, right? And so like this degree of interoperability is something that is not solved for in Ethereum today, but that is sold in the Cosmos world. And so what I think we're going to see is that Ethereum and its rollups will eventually like converge with Cosmos, so that we basically take the best of both worlds, right? Like I think the bridging technologies and so like the standardized but extremely secure like approach will pour into some of the rollup ecosystem and may become used as like, for example, like it would make a whole lot of sense to use IBC to connect between the various like OP stack rollups, right? Or sort of like have these abstractions so that it becomes really easy to connect these chains using these kind of like models. And at the same time, that will essentially like allow Ethereum to continue progressing at a much faster rate in its sort of like vertical scaling roadmap. So yeah, I think like Cosmos and Ethereum coming together is likely, it is a trend that I'm watching out for and that I think will likely occur and that I think is like highly beneficial to both ecosystems actually.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense for both the security practices, the security principles, as well as the convenience to the end user.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that it's also like a market opportunity for like a number of the sort of like hottest trends in the ecosystem today, right? Like if you look at like ETH restaking is a big thing today, but like who are going to be the customers of restaking, right? Well, because like Cosmos chains are actually kind of like at the top of the list, and in fact we see protocols like Eigenlayer sort of like starting to create these partnerships to bring their restaking products to market, right? So here you go, another piece of anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, there we go. We're gonna see. Very cool to see like Eigenlayer kind of pop up with the restaking module. We're gonna have some more conversations about like the risks around restaking. But I think that in theory, it is very, very cool to see them progress towards that route and kind of like squeeze more value out of these Ethereum validators. And then, I mean, this is continuing the trend towards the world of a million rollups. And with all these execution environments, I think we'll continue to see like more and more pop up. And then as the infrastructure layer continues to get even more well connected, I think that'll also pave the way for more rollups and more execution environments that are executing on top of these settlement environments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool, man. Well, this was a doozy. I didn't think we were going to go for almost an hour, but this was a fun conversation. As we wrap up, is there anything that you felt like you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say?
Yeah, I mean, so Celestia probably has the coolest mantra in the ecosystem. Like, build whatever is just a perfect way to encapsulate what they're trying to do. I think like what we've been trying to do with Hyperlane and sort of like what we discussed today is basically something that you can coin in a very similar manner of like, connect whatever essentially. So I guess that would be my closing note.
Connect whatever. Yeah, dude, this was awesome. Thanks for coming on. This was fun, and I look forward to connecting more with you in the future.
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan. Thanks a lot.